Before we start, tell me in the comments, where are you watching this from? Let's see which city shows up the most. We always thought of our ranch as the quiet kind of place. The sort where the wind speaks louder than the neighbors. Where you wake up to cows mooing, not horns blaring. It's been in our family for generations, tucked just past the edge of town. Trees line the property. The fence is old but strong and the barn still smells like oil and hay. Life's simple out here. No drama. No nonsense. Just work, dirt, and peace. But peace doesn't last when some folks think they own the world. It started small. Just a dusty white truck parked near our south gate one morning. We figured it was a lost driver or maybe a neighbor's guest. Grandpa didn't say much. He just stared at it for a minute, then kept on with feeding the horses. Next day the truck was back again. Same spot. Front wheels barely inside the property line. Tailpipe blowing smoke right over our fence line. Still no big deal. A little annoying but maybe harmless. On the third day Grandpa got that look in his eye. The one we knew meant he was noticing patterns. He didn't trust patterns. The man driving the truck looked official but not in a good way. Sunglasses, clipboard, a smug look stuck on his face like he practiced it in the mirror. He wasn't a cop, not really. Just someone the homeowners association hired to drive around and make people feel small. They called him a neighborhood compliance officer. We called him the HOA cop. Now let me tell you something. Our ranch isn't part of that HOA. Never has been. We're outside the limits and we like it that way. No one tells us how tall our grass should be. No one fines us for having chickens in the yard or for stacking wood too high. Freedom's worth a lot to us. And Grandpa, well, he values it more than most people value gold. But that didn't stop the HOA guy from treating the land like it was his. He parked his truck on our edge and walked up and down the street like a king inspecting his kingdom. Clipboard in hand. Taking notes. Whispering into his little radio. Acting like his boots didn't sink into the same mud as the rest of us. After a week, Grandpa decided it was time to speak up. He walked out to the man one morning. Calm, polite, firm. Told him the land he was parking on wasn't public. Said we didn't appreciate strangers leaving tire marks in the field. The man just smiled and said, "It's not a problem. I'm not hurting anything." That right there? That smile? That's when we knew he was going to be a problem. Because people like that, the ones who smile when they're stepping on your space, they never stop at just one step. Next day the truck was back again. Same place. Maybe a little closer to the fence this time. And that smug look? It was worse. Like he knew we couldn't do anything. Like he was daring us to try. Grandpa didn't say a word. Just stared out the kitchen window with his arms crossed and his coffee going cold. We tried calling the HOA office. Told them their guy was trespassing. They said they'd make a note of it. Never heard back. We even tried speaking with a few of the neighbors in that community. Most of them rolled their eyes. "Yeah, that guy's something else," they said. "He thinks he's law enforcement." But nobody did anything. A few days later, the truck wasn't just parked on the edge anymore. It was pulled halfway into our field. Front tires deep in the grass. Tailgate open. Trash tossed beside it like he'd had a snack and didn't care where the wrapper landed. There were muddy ruts in the ground. Long, ugly lines that cut through the grass Grandpa had worked hard to reseed in spring. That was the first time I saw Grandpa truly mad. Not shouting mad. Worse. Quiet mad. The kind of anger that builds like a storm you can feel in your bones. Still, he didn't yell. He didn't storm out. He just waited. The next morning the man parked again. Same spot. Same attitude. Didn't even look our way this time. Just stepped out, slammed the door and walked off to patrol some nearby houses. But something had changed. Grandpa didn't eat breakfast that day. He didn't feed the horses first. He just stood at the door looking out like he was watching a fire. His hands were clenched. His jaw was tight. And when he finally stepped outside, he didn't take his usual slow pace. He moved with purpose. I followed him to the gate. Asked him what he was going to do. He didn't answer. Just said, "He thinks this land doesn't matter. That it's just open dirt. But this dirt's mine. And I don't like being ignored." And he wasn't talking about being ignored like a kid whining at dinner. He meant something deeper. Something about respect. About how people used to treat each other. About how once if someone told you to move your truck, you moved it. Not because you had to, but because it was the decent thing to do. But decency doesn't mean much to men like that HOA guy. A few more days passed. Same routine. Truck parked. Tires deeper in our land each time. One morning, I noticed one of the horses was limping. Caught its hoof on something sharp left behind near the truck's last parking spot. Some broken metal or maybe wire. That was it for me. I was mad. But Grandpa? He stayed calm. Too calm. That night I saw him checking the tractor, making sure it still worked. The old red one with the strong winch and thick chains. He didn't say why. The next morning it rained. Not a heavy storm, but enough to soak the ground. Enough to make the field soft. And sure enough, around 9 a.m. the white truck rolled in again, splashing through the puddles. Same spot. Same arrogance. I looked at Grandpa. He looked at the truck. And he smiled, not the kind of smile that invites company. The kind of smile that says a lesson's about to be taught. He walked back into the barn and started pulling out gear. I followed him, not sure what he was planning. All I knew was this had gone on long enough. The line had been crossed too many times. And out here, when someone crosses your line, you don't just redraw it. You make sure they can't cross it again. The day felt different. Like something was shifting. And the man in the white truck had no idea what was coming. The ground squelched beneath our boots. Rain had softened everything, leaving puddles in the dips of the field and turning the dirt into thick, sticky mud. The air smelled of wet grass and damp wood, and the barn creaked under the weight of the moisture soaking into its bones. Grandpa didn't speak much that morning. He just checked the winch rope again and again like a man rehearsing something serious. The old red tractor sat there, quiet, its engine still warm from his early checks. I watched him roll up his sleeves, and for the first time in days, I noticed how firm his hands still looked. Rough, scarred, but steady. The kind of hands that once built a barn without blueprints. The kind of hands that never shook when they held a tool. The HOA guy showed up like clockwork, same as always. White truck, sunglasses, and that same smug air. Like he was doing the world a favor by breathing in it. This time, though, he drove in deeper than before. The edge of our field had turned to mush, and instead of staying near the dry gravel like any half-smart man would, he pushed straight through the mud and parked just behind the barn, where the ground dipped near the old pasture. The tires sank down a little when he stopped, but he didn't notice, or didn't care. He slammed the door and strutted away, clipboard tucked under one arm, radio clipped to his belt like he was about to break up a riot. All that authority packed into a man with no real power. Grandpa watched him walk off, shaking his head slowly. Some people only learn when the ground shifts under their feet, he muttered, more to himself than to me. Then he turned to the tractor. I asked him again what he was about to do. He looked at me, calm but firm. He's had every chance, he said. Spoken to him kindly. Warned him plain. Now I'll show him what mud feels like when you disrespect land. He didn't sound angry. That was the strange part. No fire, no yelling. Just cold certainty. I stayed back, leaning against the fence, heart pounding in my chest like I was about to witness something sacred, or dangerous. Grandpa climbed into the tractor and started it with a roar. The engine coughed once, then settled into a deep rumble. He eased it forward, slow and careful, rolling out of the barn like a bull waiting for the right moment to charge. The tires cut grooves in the wet ground as he steered toward the parked truck. He stopped a few feet behind it. No rush, no hesitation. I watched him unhook the heavy chain from the winch, drag it through the mud, and loop it under the back axle of the truck. He tightened the latch, gave it a hard tug to test it, then climbed back into the seat. The tractor's engine growled a little louder as he adjusted the gears. And then he pulled. At first, the truck resisted. Its tires clung to the mud like a child refusing to leave a playground. But the rain had done its work, and the earth wasn't holding tight anymore. With a heavy groan, the back wheels began to move. Slow at first, jerking slightly, then sliding as the mud gave way beneath them. I could hear the squelch of the tires dragging, the creak of the chain pulling tight, the slow, grinding protest of the truck being yanked against its will. The front bumper bobbed as it bounced over small mounds in the field. Mud splattered high in the air. And Grandpa just sat there, steady as stone, hands firm on the wheel. He didn't look back. He didn't flinch. He just kept driving, pulling the truck with him as if he were moving an old stump that had no business being where it was. The field dipped toward the back, where the land sloped down to a shallow creek. It wasn't deep, but the mud down there was slick and thick, and no vehicle had any business being in that part of the pasture. Not unless you wanted to spend a few hours getting it back out. Grandpa knew that. Every inch of this land was burned into his memory like an old map. He'd watched that creek swell in storms, watched cows nearly get stuck there in their younger years. He knew exactly where he was headed. The truck slid faster now, picking up a little momentum, the front tires swinging sideways as the ground tilted. The chain rattled, the mud churned, and then, without a single pause, Grandpa led that truck straight down into the soft slope and right into the edge of the creek bed. The front bumper hit the mud with a wet thump, and the tires sank halfway into the waterlogged soil. Water splashed up over the sides, mixing with the brown earth. One tire gave a pitiful spin as if trying to fight back, but it was no use. It was stuck. I stood there, mouth half open, as Grandpa turned off the engine and stepped down from the tractor. He walked over to the chain, unhooked it carefully, then tossed it back into the trailer like it was just another chore done for the day. I swear, he even wiped his hands on his jeans like he'd just finished fixing a gate. He looked over at me with the faintest smirk. No words. Just that look. Like justice had finally rolled in, pulled by a tractor and anchored in mud. And wouldn't you know it, right about then, we heard footsteps crunching through the wet grass behind the barn. The HOA guy came into view, jaw slack, eyes wide. His fancy boots stopped just short of the mud as he took in the sight of his precious truck half submerged in the creek. He looked back at Grandpa, then at the truck again. It took him a few seconds to find his voice. "What the hell, what did you do?" he barked, stepping forward. Grandpa didn't blink. "I moved it." "You can't, this is illegal. I'll have you arrested." Grandpa just shrugged. "It's my land. You were warned. I moved it off my fence line. You dragged my truck." "No," Grandpa replied. "I relocated your poor decision." For a moment it was dead silent. Just the birds, the soft sound of water flowing around the tires, and the wind catching the loose chain behind the tractor. The HOA guy turned red, face twisted like someone who just swallowed a mouthful of dirt. He pulled out his phone, threatening to call the police. Grandpa just nodded and walked back toward the barn like the conversation was over. The man stood there for a few more seconds, looking back and forth between the truck and the tractor like he still couldn't believe what had just happened. Eventually, he stomped back to his radio, barking into it, probably calling his superiors or trying to explain why his truck was now part of the local landscape. I watched him pacing, arms flying, yelling into the radio with desperation. He'd lost control of the situation and he knew it. And there was Grandpa leaning casually on a fence post, sipping from a mug like it was just another Tuesday. The man kept shouting. But the land? It stayed silent. And the truck didn't move. The shouting didn't stop for a long while. That man must have used every name in the book, from "you'll regret this" to "I know people," and all the way down to "you'll be sorry when the sheriff shows up." But all that noise just floated into the breeze, carried off by the wind like it didn't matter. And to us it didn't. The truck sat there, still half sunk in the muddy creek, water creeping higher around the tires. The grass bent under its weight, and the dirt it had torn up now looked like scars across the field. Every time I looked at it, I felt something strange, not pride exactly, but justice. Like the earth itself had finally said, "Enough," and swallowed the man's arrogance whole. Grandpa didn't flinch, not once. He didn't even raise his voice. Just kept sipping his coffee, watching the man scramble around, red in the face, acting like a trapped animal trying to claw its way back to control. But control was gone now. He'd pushed too far and now the land had pushed back. It wasn't long before a sheriff's cruiser pulled up at the edge of the property. Black and white, lights off, calm as can be. I recognized the deputy who stepped out. He'd been around these parts for years and he knew better than most that there were two kinds of folks out here, the ones who lived by rules written on paper and the ones who lived by the rules of the land. He tipped his hat when he saw Grandpa. "Morning, Frank," he said. Grandpa nodded. "Mornin', Joe." Then the HOA guy came charging across the field like a man finally seeing salvation. His boots slipped in the mud, arms flailing, yelling before he even reached the deputy. "This man stole my vehicle. He dragged it into the water. That's destruction of property." The deputy raised one hand, slow and steady. "Let's start with calm, son. Take a breath." The HOA guy huffed like he'd been asked to stop breathing instead. He waved toward the truck. "Look at that. He used a tractor and a chain. That's illegal. That's malicious." The deputy looked over at the truck, then back at Grandpa. His eyes narrowed just a bit. "Is that true, Frank?" Grandpa took a long breath, like he'd been waiting for this moment to say just the right words. "That fella's been trespassing for over a week. I asked him kindly to stop. Told him this land ain't public and it sure as hell ain't HOA territory. He ignored every warning. Parked deeper every time. Started tearing up the pasture. My horse got injured from the trash he left behind. He didn't listen. So today, I moved his vehicle to a spot where he couldn't hurt anything." The deputy looked down at the ground, at the torn-up earth, at the creek, at the way the grass had been flattened. "And you're telling me," he said slowly, "that he was parked on your property?" "Yes, sir," Grandpa said. "Got it all on camera too. Last 5 days. Every time he pulled up." That's when the HOA guy's face changed. He started shaking his head real fast like if he moved quick enough he could erase what had just been said. There's no signs. No fences back there. I thought it was just unused land. The deputy raised an eyebrow. You assumed, and you kept doing it after being told otherwise. The HOA guy threw up his hands. This is ridiculous. That truck is part of my job. It's not some toy you can just yank around. No, the deputy replied calmly. But it's also not immune to the law. And trespassing is trespassing. Doesn't matter what logo you've got on the door. I watched the man deflate a little. His chest puffed less. His arms dropped to his sides. He kept trying to look angry, but it was clear the wind had gone out of his storm. You're not gonna do anything? He asked, voice suddenly softer. The deputy tilted his head toward the creek. Looks like natural consequences already did the heavy lifting. Then he turned to Grandpa again. Mind if I take a look at that camera footage, Frank? Grandpa nodded and walked off toward the house. I followed, heart pounding. Not out of fear, but out of something else, a kind of thrill I'd never felt before. Watching justice come not from a courtroom or a badge, but from the land itself. Inside the house, Grandpa plugged in the camera feed. The footage showed everything. Day after day of the white truck creeping deeper into the pasture. The man climbing out with that same arrogant stride. The trash. The tire ruts. And finally the tractor, slow and steady, dragging the truck away like it was just another broken fence post that didn't belong. The deputy watched silently. When it was over, he nodded and tipped his hat again. Well, he said, that clears it up. We walked back out and the HOA guy was still there, pacing like he was trying to figure out how to turn back time. When he saw us return, he straightened up again. Well, he demanded. The deputy looked at him long and hard. I suggest you get a tow truck, and I suggest you don't step on this property again. Not unless you want to file a formal apology, and even then I wouldn't count on forgiveness. The HOA guy opened his mouth but nothing came out. He looked over at his truck, stuck and soaked. Then back at us. Then down at his shoes. He walked off without another word. And for the first time in days the field felt quiet again. The tow truck didn't arrive until much later. By then the mud had thickened and it took 2 winches and a whole lot of cursing to pull that white truck free. The grass was torn worse than before and I could see Grandpa watching, jaw clenched but calm. When they finally got the truck out and drove off, the sun had already started to drop low behind the trees. The sky turned gold, then orange. The barn cast long shadows across the field, and the creek returned to its usual quiet gurgle. Grandpa walked the edge of the pasture, kicking at bits of trash the man had left behind. A crumpled soda can, a torn corner of a clipboard form, some shattered plastic from the undercarriage. He picked each piece up like it was part of a ritual, placing them in a rusted bucket one by one. I stood nearby, not saying anything, just watching, trying to understand what it all meant. After a while, Grandpa looked up and said, "It ain't about the truck." I nodded, even though I didn't quite understand. "It's about respect," he said. "Land gives you everything, food, space, peace. But only if you treat it right. And people? They're part of the land too. You don't trample either one." The air was cool now, the kind of chill that slips under your collar but doesn't bite. It was quiet again, real quiet. Like the land was finally resting. And maybe, just maybe, Grandpa was too. The sun hadn't been up long when the call came in. Not a phone call, not a text. No, it was the sound of gravel crunching. A sound that doesn't belong in the early morning when everything's supposed to be still. The kind of sound that tells you someone's come back, not with an apology but with more to prove. Grandpa was already up, of course. He was always up before the sky turned blue. He had his coffee mug in one hand and a folded newspaper under the other arm when I stepped out onto the porch. His eyes were on the driveway, calm but sharp as a hawk's. He didn't say a word. He just watched. Another truck had pulled up. Not the same white one. That one probably still smelled like wet mud and shame. This one was newer, shinier, had tinted windows and chrome that gleamed like it belonged in a city showroom, not out here in the dust and dew of the countryside. 2 men stepped out. One was the same HOA officer. He looked tired now, older somehow, like the land had taken something out of him. The other man wore a blazer, expensive shoes, sunglasses that didn't quite fit the dirt on his tires. A clipboard in his hand again, like it might protect him from the truth this place carried. Grandpa stepped down off the porch and walked slowly toward them. Not aggressive, not nervous. Just steady. The way trees move in a storm, rooted deep and unbothered by noise. "Morning," the man in the blazer said, offering a polite nod that didn't match the tension in his jaw. "You must be Frank." Grandpa nodded once. "I'm Mitchell Graham," he said. "Senior Regional Director for the HOA Enforcement Board. We received a complaint." A serious one. Grandpa looked at the man. His silence stretched out just long enough to make the moment uncomfortable. You're standing on my land, he said, calm as ever. You planning to change that, or should we keep talking? The director blinked. Yes. Sorry. He stepped back half a foot, shoes sinking slightly into the moist edge of the gravel. I'd like to talk about a resolution, Mitchell said. The vehicle incident. The conflict. It's created unnecessary waves in our reports. Grandpa raised an eyebrow. You come here to tell me I hurt your paperwork? No, Mitchell said. I came here to find a way forward. That truck was government property. Not officially registered to the HOA but on loan. The damages. Grandpa cut him off with a soft grunt. Don't care whose name is on it. Man parks it where he ain't supposed to, he better be ready to drag it back out himself. The HOA officer beside him shifted uncomfortably. He hadn't said a word yet, just stared at the barn like it held ghosts from last week. We don't want a lawsuit, Mitchell said. We want to avoid escalation. Grandpa took a slow step forward. You want to talk lawsuits? He asked. You sent a man onto my land without my permission after I told him plain to stop. You don't own this land, never have. That truck could have hurt my animals. My grandson. You think dragging it out of a creek is escalation? There was a silence after that. A heavy one. Even the wind stopped moving. Mitchell looked away just for a second. We'll revise the territory maps, he said quietly. Your land will be clearly marked as private. That officer won't return. No one from your board will, Grandpa said. It wasn't a threat. Just a fact laid in stone. The two men stood there, shuffling papers they weren't going to need. Then Mitchell finally nodded. Understood. And just like that they turned and left. The gravel crunched again, tires spun dust into the air, and the truck disappeared down the road the same way it came, loud, flashy, and empty. Later that day I sat with Grandpa under the old elm tree behind the barn. He was sanding down a length of wood, fixing one of the fence posts that had rotted after too many rainy seasons. The hum of the sander blended with the chirp of cicadas and the soft cluck of chickens wandering nearby. You think they'll stay gone? I asked. Grandpa didn't look up. For a while. Forever. He set the sander down, wiped his hands on a rag and looked out at the pasture. This world's full of people who think lines on paper matter more than respect. But this land don't care about your maps or your titles. It remembers how you treat it. I looked out at the same pasture. The mud had mostly dried now, but the damage was still there. Torn grass, deep ruts, the memory of arrogance left behind like a scar on the earth. That truck, I said, it'll never be the same. Grandpa chuckled softly. Neither will he. That night we sat on the porch and watched the stars come out. No lights from neighbors, no city glow. Just sky. Deep and wide and full of quiet. It felt like the land was breathing again, free from the weight of unwanted wheels and loud voices. A few days passed, then a week. The pasture started to heal. The horses wandered a little further out now, no longer avoiding that corner of the field. Birds returned to their usual spots. The peace was real, thick and honest. One morning, while mending a broken gate, we heard an unfamiliar sound again. But this time, it wasn't a vehicle or angry shouting. It was the sound of something softer. An envelope being slid under the barn door. It was a letter. Handwritten. From the HOA officer. Inside was a simple note. No excuses, no legal threats. Just one line. I didn't understand the land before. I do now. And with it, a folded photograph. The truck. Still muddy, still dented. But parked now in what looked like a garage, its wheels resting on bricks instead of pavement. As if even the man who once disrespected our pasture was learning to keep his tires clean. To leave no marks where they don't belong. Grandpa read the letter, then handed it to me without a word. I watched his eyes as he looked off into the horizon, not smiling but something close. A kind of peace that doesn't come from winning, it comes from standing firm. From knowing that when the rules failed, the land still remembered. That night a storm rolled in. Soft at first, just a murmur in the trees, then rain tapping against the roof in rhythm. We sat inside, lights dimmed, the scent of cedarwood and old earth curling through the air. And in that storm the house felt stronger. Not because it was made of brick and nails, but because it sat on land that had been defended. The kind of land that doesn't need fences to stand tall. The kind of land that, when wronged, will rise up with muddy hands and pull justice from the ground itself.